Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we're going to talk a little bit about refactoring code, refactored code. Is it subjectively better or objectively better? And what that means in a mob. So, Austin, what are you thinking here?
Nice, nice. Yeah, awesome. And yeah, this was came up fairly recently with mobbing where we basically did the do both experiment as far as refactoring the code. So it was a serverless function, and there were basically two different ways to refactor it. We had basically done the checklist of test-driven all the needed behaviors, handled all the zombies. So we'll put a link in the show notes for that, the 0, 1 mini exceptional cases. And then we were just kind of doing the final cleanup. And so we ran one person's experiment on refactoring, and then we ran another experiment on refactoring. And after doing both refactoring experiments, we kind of had like an A and B of the code, two different ways to go about it. Um, the discussion was good, but also confusing because um, basically it was stated that well, at this point, it's just like, it's subjective. Like one person likes one better, another one likes another one better.
Hmm.
And kind of like ice cream. Like it's hard for me to say that, Chris, your choice, let's just say pistachio ice cream is just, is wrong or whatever, right? That's like a preference. I don't even know if you like pistachio ice cream. I know you wouldn't like bell pepper ice cream. I know that
Yeah,
for
definitely down on anything bell pepper related. So, if you disagree with me, you can say it in the comments, but I'll probably just unfollow if you like bell peppers. So,
I won't tell you if I do because you might just like end this conversation right
yeah,
now.
that's when Chris hung up.
But anyways, it was kind of posed in that kind of fashion.
Hmm.
And then it felt like there was kind of a stalemate in the mob because then it kind of turns into whose preference do we go with, mob member A or mob member B? You know what I mean? For the
Right.
ice cream we're going to pick for the team. Um, and so, yeah, what's kind of I can share what I did in that scenario, and I'm not sure if it was good or bad, but I'm kind of curious before I share what I did. What's kind of your take on this kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so the do both scenario, a lot of the times, I go to flipping a coin a lot of the time. I'm like, so yeah, I think often it's like if I'm passionate about a solution, but I don't mind either way we go. And even if I do, but if there's like conflict, right, it's better to flip a coin and move on. But sometimes it's like convincing is a worthwhile activity. A lot of times, like, a lot of learning can come out of that. So like the really simplistic, if all things considered, if everything was equal, there was no real way to go, what to do forward. It's better to move on, and just flip a coin, I think. And I've done that in a number of scenarios where it's just like uh, and it wasn't like a passionate disagreement, but maybe it was just like, oh, well, you really could go one way or another. And often I'll say that I'll say, oh, this is kind of the same both ways, and we can go either way. But I don't know exactly the specific details of the
Sure.
scenario, but um, yeah, I mean, for me, if everybody's kind of put everything on the table, a lot of times I'll just go with flipping a coin.
Nice, nice. Yeah. And I think you're right. That probably was a valid choice for this scenario. Because it wasn't like we're talking about a 10,000 line method, is option A, and then option B is a refactored method into multiple ones or something like
Right.
that. It was kind of more at the um, how how much refactoring do you do, right? How much high level policy and low level detail do you separate, right? And so maybe one was like moderate levels of extraction and one was more levels of extraction, basically.
Right.
And yeah, so I could see flipping a coin because in this case, it wasn't like end of the world type deal, right? Like it wasn't like in the deal breaker category for me where it was kind of like, oh, this, option A is ship to production without, unit tests or fast tests. And option
Right.
B is let's do, ship to production, but with test coverage, like that kind of thing I would probably not flip a coin on.
Right.
uh, but or at least if we did go without the test, I'd be like monitoring that experiment very closely. But yeah, the significance level was lower, but I almost feel like for me, it was kind of like, wait, but it isn't a subjective thing. It was almost like an in principle thing arose in me that was like, yes, there are objective differences though, right? And so the experiment I ran was I fed both option A of the refactoring and option B of the refactoring to the bot. So in this case, it was Copilot, kind of. I think they used to call it built into Bing, but now it's just like
Yeah,
Microsoft's
Microsoft
Copilot.
Copilot as
Yeah,
opposed to GitHub Copilot.
yeah. But even they seem like they're the same thing when it's the one in the
Right.
IDE or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah.
And then I asked it, what are the pros and cons of, option A versus option B? And, specifically, I asked about cognitive load, cyclomatic complexity, readability, and maintainability.
Mm,
And it did say that, because what came to mind was like, well, you can put a number to cyclomatic complexity, right? Like that's not
right.
a subjective thing, right? There is an objective difference there. And so and I asked for pros and cons of the different refactoring options. And then I sent that to the team, and then and then on Monday we decided and we went with one. But what was interesting to me was that it did at least the AI thought there was objective differences. It wasn't just like, picking a different flavor of ice cream, right? Like
Right.
it said one option had lower cognitive load, lower cyclomatic complexity, higher readability, higher maintainability, but the air handling was kind of like as a lower level implementation detail, right?
Hmm.
And so where the other option had the air handling like in your face as like, the thing you see right when you come into the main method, right? And so it was basically saying one has, better properties for this, but the other makes it more obvious how errors are handled or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, often choices like that are not straightforward, and a lot of the times they are trade-offs. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
frequently, you know, that's where I think people get stuck a lot of times is asymmetric trade-offs. Like, it's not six of one, half dozen of the other. It's like I'm gonna have eggs or I'm gonna have, oranges, and you don't know what's gonna. I mean, if you have scurvy, oranges is like really important over eggs, but if you're lacking in
Yes.
protein, then you might need eggs.
Yes.
So asymmetric trade-offs are really challenging. But and also there are different objectives for the team. And so a lot of time I look at it because there's also like emotional stress of the team and safety of the team members and other things along those lines that you have to consider that are just like not, they don't end up in the code at all.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think you could be purely clinical about the decision. But often I don't think it's as simple as that. Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. There was trade-offs, but I would just say in general, kind of going back to the Seven Habits series we did on what's your
Yeah.
North Star, like I feel like low cognitive load, low cyclomatic complexity, high readability, and high maintainability are more of the principles, at least I'm after,
Right.
than low-level error handling being the front and center most obvious thing of the code, and
Yeah, so
so
so being in a mob, you have to ask yourself,
yeah,
are the principles of all the mobbers aligned?
right, right,
Right. And
yeah,
then if they aren't, then is there a way to get more aligned? And then there's
mhm,
the whole like question of disagree and commit. And
right,
so,
right, yeah,
just at a macro level, I think um there's certainly like principled choices and then developing principles. And so, one thing that I really like about mobbing, and I tell people often, is like, apathy is what you don't want, right? You don't want somebody saying, yeah, I'm just going along with you because, I just want to code for the day, clock in and clock out. And so a lot of people, I just encourage them to have principles at all because I think I run into a lot of situations where people just don't have a set of principles and they don't care about the choice.
yeah,
And I think that's worse than having a big disagreement about where to go. And so I think you're more likely to run into situations where people don't have principles or uh, or the conflict is so great you can't move on. And so disagree and commit and principal choices are really important. Um, uh, and then there's like the shifting of perspective. And so, again, I kind of always go back to Linda Rising and the like appealing to the and telling stories and appealing to the emotional side of the choice, because over time you're going to be needing to shift the principles of other mobbers, um, and so it gets, yeah, so the clinical decision uh, can actually take away from the relationship. And so where do you balance that, right? And so, but if things are really gelling and all things considered are great, then having and all your principles are aligned, then you would always come to the same choice, right? It would be very homogenistic. Um, and so you know, and there can be benefit in that, but you probably don't want that, right? You want a lot of disagreement and then a disagree and commit, and then that way, um, you're more likely to evolve to something better, right?
Mhm.
Which is, the maybe the evolutionary algorithm enthusiast speaking in me.
Yeah, for sure. And I do like that because if it were completely homogenous, as you said, like there would be no objection to the principles, right?
Right,
And then there'd be probably more likely a shallower understanding of the principles in general. Because when they're objected to and you can talk through them, you get a deeper understanding, and one explaining them and the others kind of engaged in the conversation. And so I think that that is always a good thing. So even um, I've seen it, the benefit of becoming the skeptic, even if you do agree,
right,
just to just to make sure that we're not just going along for the ride, like you said, homogenistically. So yeah, and I think I don't know, this is something I guess I've been learning about myself is I think I'm like very single threaded and simple. So I'm kind of like, here are my principles, and so here are the consequences that follow from the principles, and we're just going to follow them, right?
right,
Where I feel like um others might be more I don't know, cut and paste. Like sometimes, sometimes we follow these principles and sometimes we don't. And I think I'm more robotic.
right.
So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
there's benefits, and
Yeah.
so like especially if you're coaching new developers, right?
Hmm.
Then you can easily talk to the principals and you can establish,
Hmm.
you know, consistency. But as I think especially as you get to mobs where there's lots of really senior people and they have had their principles evolve differently over the course of their careers,
Right.
you can really get into that like deep disagreement. Like this fundamentally hurts my soul to do this way, and you have to somehow work through that.
Sure.
And that's where I think flipping the coin comes in and
Sure.
play.
Yeah.
Um, because I think generally speaking, if you have a number of really principled people, like I'm kind of using that more of as a proxy of like people that have a set way of like this is
Mhm.
my playbook. Like if somebody has a playbook, right, for
Mm.
how they're going to approach a problem,
Right.
and those differ, um, then I don't think that they'll differ so much that if you alternated between playbooks, that you wouldn't end up in a better place. That's like maybe a little mix of the two. Um, but it can always get to a point where it's worse, but that's where the do both, I think, comes into play as well.
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah. 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 And I think, yeah, I guess I'm not sure what I learned from the experience was like, do I stick to my principles, like, and be radically candid with them, kind but direct, in that, you know, let's not mix high level policy and low level detail, or is it, run other people's experiments even if they break what seems to me the principles, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I guess flip a coin solves that problem if we're ever deadlocked again. So,
right. And yeah, so again, it's like the takeaways. And so if going that way does cause a problem in the future, you don't want to go as far as to say I told you so, but you definitely can can say, like, bring it up as an example later with the same group and say, like, hey, before, I know we took this path and it kind of has led us here, like, maybe
Mhm.
we can approach it a different way. So often I'll just use those moments as examples in future, or I work on how I articulate the thing, or try and influence, right? So often it'll be, um, if I know they're a fan of another practice and there is some reference to this topic in that practice, then I'll casually bring that up at a later date. But nothing, like when working on software, I think nothing is so urgent that uh, I mean, there is the stop the line when you're feeling unsafe, right?
Sure.
But there's often, and I think that's when you're talking about deploying with no tests or something. But when you're feeling like it's something that can go on a little longer, sometimes it's better to play the longer term influence game rather than the I must convince them now and it's the end of the world if we don't do it this way, right?
Right. Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you're right that yes, some things are safe enough to play out in production and some things aren't. So safety is critical
right.
with making it safe before you run an experiment like that. So that's great. And so maybe this episode leaves more unanswered questions than answers, and that's fine because we'd love to hear from the community on this one. So yeah.
Yeah, talk to us about
Thanks
it.
for listening to my story here and and our thoughts on it. And we love to hear your thoughts. Like what's your take on refactored code, options being subjectively or objectively better, how to handle disagreements in a team or a mob. What's your take? And thank you so much for your time, everybody. And mob on and have a good one. Adios.
Bye, everyone.